Welcome to the Project Management Prepcast, your guide to PMP exam success. Here's your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner.
Welcome back to part 2 of our review of the control costs process. I'm your instructor, Cornelius Fichtner. In part 1, we went through the overview and the inputs of the process, and now in part 2, we are shifting our attention to the tools, techniques, outputs, and our usual review and sample questions at the end. There are 6 tools and techniques that we need to look at for this process. They are earned value management, forecasting, the to complete performance index, better known as the TCPI. We have performance reviews, project management software, and then finally the reserve analysis. I've mentioned it a couple of times in part 1 that we will not have a full discussion of earned value management in this lesson. Instead, we covered that separately in our lesson on Introduction and Advanced Earned Value Management. Right now, let's simply define what they are and then move on and take a closer look at the 3 other tools and techniques that we have for this process. So, earned value management. This is how we will measure our progress on the project. According to the PMBOK guide, earned value management is a methodology that combines scope, schedule, and resource measurements to assess project performance and progress. Forecasting, this is a prediction on how we will do on our project. And here the PMBOK guide defines this as an estimate or prediction of conditions and events in the future of the project based on information and knowledge available at the time of the forecast. The information is based on the project's past performance and expected future performance and includes information that could impact the project in the future, such as estimates at completion and estimates to complete. And finally, we have the to complete performance index. Again, according to the PMBOK guide, it is a measure of the cost performance that is required to be achieved with the remaining resources in order to meet a specific management goal, expressed as the ratio of the cost to finish the outstanding work to the remaining budget. Or in plain English, how much is it going to cost us to finish this thing? So let's now continue with our other 3 tools and techniques, beginning with performance reviews. Formally, the PMBOK guide defines performance reviews as a technique that is used to measure, compare, and analyze actual performance of work in progress on the project against the baseline. And we've highlighted actual performance and baseline here in this definition. This is what you are doing in a performance review. You are looking at actual performance in light of what you had established as a baseline. These performance reviews could be formal or informal meetings, or it could be just yourself sitting down reviewing the project performance. How you perform these reviews is not really all that important. It's the 3 types of possible results that are important. First, we want to take a look at them and get a variance analysis. You start by comparing the actual project performance to the plan, and you will get a variance as your result. Now you can go ahead and analyze the variance. What is the cause of the variance? Is the variance greater than any of the thresholds that we have defined? Do we need to take any corrective or preventive action? Note that your influence over variances is greatest at the beginning of the project and diminishes as you get towards the end. Second, you will perform a trend analysis. As the name suggests, you will look at your past performance to determine what the future will look like, usually using graphical techniques of some kind. But you will also look at your variances over time. Remember that you don't do this process just once. You repeat it again and again. So you will have a list of variances from last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and so on. That way you can see trends and make appropriate decisions. And lastly, we will look at the earned value performance. This is where we compare our performance measurement baseline against the actual cost and schedule, and where we will calculate the earned value indicators. In case of earned value management not being used on your project, you compare the cost baseline simply with your actual cost. Once you have seen the lesson on earned value management, you'll realize that earned value is full of formulas, and the best way to work with these formulas is, of course, by using project management software, which is our next tool and technique. But don't immediately think of PlanView, Niku, MS Project, or other kinds of full-blown project management software. Even a simple spreadsheet is a form of project management software and can help you calculate earned value forecasts and your cost. The project management software will help you track the 3 earned value dimensions of planned value, earned value, and actual cost. It can graphically display trends and variations which help in analysis and reporting. So you can see having project management software is an immense help in controlling your cost. And as our last tool and technique, we have the reserve analysis. We used the analogy in a previous lesson comparing the reserve analysis with our own household budget, where we allocated an emergency or reserve fund available for use for all the just-in-case scenarios. For the household budget and also for our project budget, looking at our reserves is not a one-time process. You perform a reserve analysis when it makes sense. This might be periodically at the end of each quarter or year, when there is a significant change in circumstances, or at a significant milestone, when reserves should be revisited as part of the control costs process. You need to consider the status of both contingency and management reserves. When you look at the reserves, you need to determine if these reserves are still needed and if the timing of the needs is still as planned. You need to ask, can you free up any reserves? Perhaps a risk event which was previously predicted never came to pass. Thus, any associated reserves set aside can now be freed up. Or, on the other hand, do we need more reserves? As the project is being executed, it is possible that risks have a greater financial impact than originally anticipated. Perhaps new risks have arisen or have been identified, which requires you to bolster your reserves. And now for the outputs of the control costs process. Here we have the following: work performance information, cost forecasts, change requests, project management plan updates, project document updates, and finally, organizational process asset updates. So what do we mean by work performance information? Well, work performance information is one of the results of the earned value calculations. These need to be documented and communicated. Stakeholder communication is important. Stakeholders need to be provided with this critical work performance information. It might be an alphabet soup of information in your head listening to all this right now. Work performance information includes the CV, the SV, the CPI, the SPI, the TCPI, and the VAC. But not to worry, we will explain what all of these means in the earned value management lesson. What is important to know right now is that the work performance information represents different variance calculations and efficiency indices for both cost and schedule. For instance, we want to know what the cost variance is. How much are we above or below our baseline? With respect to cost forecasts, well, we want to know how much over or under our budget we will be by the end of the project. We'd like to know early enough whether or not we can have the project completed within budget. This is called the estimate to complete, the ETC. According to the PMBOK guide, estimate to complete is the expected cost to finish all the remaining project work. So for an unfinished construction, we have to figure out what has yet to be built and figure out how much it will cost. But we also want to forecast how much over or under budget we will be in total once the project is completed. There is a formula for that, and the result is called the estimate at completion. The PMBOK guide definition for estimate at completion, EAC, is that it is the expected total cost of completing all work expressed as the sum of the actual cost to date and the estimate to complete. So in other words, it is how much we expect the completed building will cost. And again, just as it was the case for work performance information, it is important to document and communicate cost forecasts to the stakeholders. Let's step back for a moment here and think about why the cost baseline might need to be changed. Well, a scope change is an obvious reason for a change. If the owner revised the original plan and is now asking for an additional bathroom to be built, then the house renovation will likely become more costly. Scope change is not the only reason that the cost baseline can change. There are some instances when change in cost is so severe that it merits an update to the cost baseline. For example, the cost of activity resources may change. This can be driven by factors outside of the project. For instance, when labor rates change or when the cost of fuel goes up sharply. It could also be internal. Cost estimates may be way off. This can happen when things really go bad on a project and you have enormous cost overruns. Or perhaps you were relying on a cost estimation method which by its very nature was very inaccurate. Risks, they may also affect scope and cost too. For example, the lead developer on your agile software development project leaves the project and you are having difficulty replacing him. It is usually the case that cost baselines are changed to reflect additional cost, though more rare it is possible to make downward adjustments. For the next output, we have change requests. The PMBOK guide defines a change request as a formal proposal to modify any document, deliverable or baseline. The items most relevant to the control costs process are documents and baselines. For documents, you need to formally request to modify your project management plan or its components. You can't just nilly-willy go in there and make changes without having a change request. And if you change your cost baseline, guess what? You need a change request. And you need to create and process the change requests in accordance with the Perform Integrated Change Control process. When considering change requests, these can include preventive action, and the PMBOK guide defines preventive action as an intentional activity that ensures that the future performance of the project work is aligned with the project management plan. To rephrase, you are ensuring a positive event or positive behavior actually happens, or you're preventing a negative from occurring so you can ensure performance. An example of preventive actions would be spending for extra server space and buying document management software to maintain project files. This enables the project team to perform their work without interruption and prevents them from losing or having to redo any of their work due to lost files. Corrective action, the PMBOK guide here defines this as an intentional activity that realigns the performance of the project work with the project cost management plan. This is the second type of change request. One way of thinking about this is that you are taking an action to address an undesirable situation which has already arisen or may still be ongoing. This would be the case if you already had an existing issue with your project files. For example, you have already run out of space or lost files. If you then spend for extra servers or a document management software, then that would be considered corrective actions. Let's take this a step further, because you may ask, what's the difference between a regular change request and a change request for preventive or corrective actions? I always explain it as follows. Change requests, regular change requests, they focus mostly on the what, like the updates to documented information about the project. For instance, we request that the cost baseline is updated. Corrective or preventive action, on the other hand, those are the changes to the how, like how we execute the project. For instance, we recommend that we bring on additional resources instead of working overtime, because we saw that we have to pay our current resources 25% extra for the overtime hours. It's cheaper for us to have more people work at 100% of the cost than it is to have people work overtime at 125% of the cost. You may recall in part 1 of this lesson we saw the project management plan as an input to the process, and now we see updates to the project management plan as an output. Because at this point we have done extensive analysis. We probably have used the earned value management and forecasting techniques. We've looked at performance and what it might take to complete the project. Perhaps we've taken a look at our reserves. We know much more at this point than we did at the beginning of the process when we had the project management plan as an input. So there is progressive elaboration at play here. You have to go through iterative versions of your documents as you have more detailed and accurate information available. This is likely to be the case for the project management plan, which may require updates to its components, namely the cost baseline and the cost management plan. The cost baseline may need to be updated, for example, if changes were approved that affected the scope, resources, and cost estimates. Then it may be the case that the cost baseline needs to be corrected to have a better, or shall we say a more realistic basis for our performance measurements, because you would not want your future performance goals to be tied to a cost baseline that is now out of date and no longer makes sense. We also may need to update the cost management plan, because it spells out triggers for when you need to take action if the difference between your actual and expected costs falls outside of specified limits. Perhaps these limits or thresholds need to be adjusted as a result of the analysis that was done during the cost control process. If the key stakeholders require it, other changes to the original cost management plan may be warranted. For example, perhaps they require a change to the level of accuracy of your rules about rounding of figures for project cost management. Your project documents as a collective is like a house of cards. This house of cards reflects the interdependencies among the different areas and processes. There are some cards that are at the base, like the project management plan that we discussed, which are foundational to all the others. Updating a document, especially the foundational ones, may mean addressing potential issues in other documents. So decisions or changes to control costs may not only impact the project management plan, but also other documents, such as cost estimates. For example, an approved scope change may mean that cost estimates should be updated, or the basis of estimates. In the same example, then, perhaps the assumptions, details of the scope of work, the ranges of estimates, and confidence levels that are contained in the basis of our estimates should be updated as well to reflect the change in scope. Again, these are just two examples of documents that may need to be updated, but there could be others. Another way of looking at it is that just as it was the case for the project management plan, there is progressive elaboration at work. We know more about our project now than we did before, so some of our projects may need to be updated. And for our final output, we have updates to the organizational process assets. To name just a few examples, you may have to update assets such as lessons learned. Perhaps there are lessons you can include here, which will form the basis of future organizational policies. Causes of variances. For the future, it is also good to have some sort of a documentation. What the root cause of a variance was. Was it something within or without your control? This perhaps could be related to a lessons learned. The best way to remember the causes is by documenting them, and this documentation then becomes part of the organizational process assets. There could be corrective actions. The corrective actions you include here can form the basis for future risk analysis or preventive actions taken on projects. Financial databases. The data you add may help cost estimation on future projects. Overall, updating organizational process assets is probably not only mandated by your organizational policies, but also makes sense and is good practice. Consider it as part of being a good corporate citizen and member of your work community. Now, you want other projects to have the benefit of your experience. You relied on organizational process assets as a resource in project cost management and in other areas. They provided you with templates, examples, and other guidance. So, in this case right now, we are giving back. Don't forget that variances and all of these updates will also have to be communicated to the stakeholders and that they must follow the Perform Integrated Change Control process. For example, your cost baseline should not just be changed just because we can, but usually only after you approve a change in the project scope. I have seen this particular example also as a question in a sample test online. The situation was that there was an approval for a scope change and you had to select what the next step is that the project manager should take. The best out of the 4 answers was in fact update the cost baseline. So what type of questions do we see on the various commercially available PMP pre-exams online? Well, as always, questions are both highly situational as well as knowledge-based in regards to information that you can find in the PMBOK guide. In project costs, the questions usually focus mostly on earned value techniques and its formulas. So you must know the formulas. You must know the concepts behind the formulas, and you must be able to apply and interpret earned value formulas. And one area that is always used in the commercially available tests are change requests. You must know how they are approved, documented, and implemented to update any part of your project. And here is one such earned value related question that you should be able to answer even though we haven't looked at any of the earned value formulas and concepts yet. Which of the following is a measure of schedule performance on a project? Is it A, earned value, B, planned value, C, the cost variance, or D, the schedule variance? The answer really lies in the question there, the first word in the second line, schedule performance, because the only one of our 4 answers that talks about schedule is the schedule variance. So the correct answer here is D, and you can deduce this simply with logic because that is the only one of those earned value management indicators, schedule variance, that talks about the schedule. A few quick exam tips here in regards to earned value management. The first one is rather obvious. Please do read the earned value section in the PMBOK guide several times, and of course also watch our separate lesson on this topic several times so you really understand what earned value is all about. Go to the PMP resources section on the PMPrepcast.com website. We have links to various helpful articles on the topic of earned value. And if you really want some in-depth help and be able to apply earned value formulas and learn about them and get some in-depth overviews and explanations on what this is all about, please do consider getting yourself a license of our PM formulas at pmformulas.com. Let's review. The general concept behind control costs is apparent from its name. You want to control your costs, measure it, report it, control it, and make sure that you have no overruns. You also want to remember that we are discussing cost here and not time. So be careful to remember that when we talk about variances, we discuss cost variances. That is a mistake easily made because cost and time are so tightly linked. And while most of your focus is going to be on negative variances, you also want to take a look at positive variances. No matter what the variance is, if it is outside of the limits that you have set, then your process is not in control. So you want to act and get the process within the acceptable limits. And there are many outputs from this process. There are various updates, change requests, and of course your work performance information and forecasts. We have now reached the end of this lesson, so Justine and I say goodbye. Well, to be precise, Justine says,
Goodbye, Yellow Brick Road.
And I say, until next time.